The wind howled through the frozen night, rattling the windows of the Carter family's quiet home. But it wasn't the storm that made 6-year-old Noah stop in his tracks. It was something outside. A shadow, barely visible against the snow, lying motionless at their doorstep. "Dad, Mom, someone's out there," Noah whispered, his small hands pressed against the glass. When Ethan opened the door, the sight left them breathless. A massive German shepherd, battered, bleeding, and barely alive. What happened to this dog? And why did Noah feel deep in his heart that Max had come for them? For a reason. The winter storm had arrived earlier than expected, swallowing the quiet town of Brunswick, Maine, in a thick curtain of snow. The wind roared through the narrow streets, rattling window panes and shaking the bare branches of the trees. Most people were tucked away in their warm homes, safe from the unforgiving cold. Inside a cozy 2-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac, Ethan Carter stirred a pot of soup on the stove, while his wife, Grace Carter, set the dining table. Their 6-year-old son, Noah, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, his small hands carefully arranging toy cars in neat rows. The Carter family. Ethan Carter was a man of quiet strength, his broad shoulders and tall frame giving him a commanding presence. His dark brown hair had started to show the first traces of grey, a testament to the long hours he spent balancing his work as a high school history teacher and being a devoted father. Though his voice was deep and firm, there was warmth in it, something that made his students admire him and his son feel safe. Grace Carter, in contrast, carried a gentler presence. She was slender, with wavy chestnut-brown hair that often fell in loose strands around her face as she worked. Once a promising painter, she had put her career on hold to raise Noah, though the longing to create still lingered in her eyes. She was a woman who saw beauty in the smallest details, like the way candlelight flickered against a window pane or how the first snowfall of the season turned the world into a pristine canvas. Noah, their only child, had inherited his mother's striking blue eyes and his father's quiet curiosity. At 6 years old, he was unusually observant for his age, always noticing things others overlooked, always asking questions that carried weight beyond his years. As Grace placed a bowl of steaming soup on the table, a powerful gust of wind howled through the night, making the house groan. The lights flickered but stayed on. That was when Noah stopped playing, his small head tilted, as if listening to something beyond the walls of their home. Then he turned to his mother. "Mum," he whispered, "there's something outside." Grace glanced at him, her brows knitting together. "It's just the wind, sweetheart." But Noah was already pushing himself up, his feet padding softly across the wooden floor. He pressed his little hands against the frosted window pane, his breath fogging up the glass. Outside, barely visible through the swirling snow, was a dark shape lying motionless on their porch. The Discovery. Ethan noticed Noah's sudden stillness and followed his gaze. His chest tightened when he saw it, a large figure, partially covered in snow. A dog? "I'll check it out," Ethan said, grabbing his coat. The moment he stepped onto the porch, the bitter wind clawed at his skin. Snow crunched under his boots as he approached the unmoving form. When he crouched down, his breath hitched. It was a German shepherd, its once thick coat matted with ice, mud, and something darker, blood. Its ribs jutted out beneath its fur, and one of its ears was torn at the tip. The dog's body barely stirred, but its chest still rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. It was alive, but only just. Behind him, the front door creaked open. "Dad?" Noah's voice was small, hesitant. Ethan turned sharply. "Noah, go back inside." But Noah didn't move. His blue eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked onto the dog. He took a slow step forward. "He's scared," Noah murmured. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't an expert on dogs, but he knew enough to be wary, especially with a wounded one. A cornered animal might lash out in fear. Before he could speak, the dog stirred. A weak whimper escaped its throat, and for a brief moment it lifted its head. That was when Ethan saw its amber eyes, eyes that were startlingly intelligent, filled not with aggression, but with something else, a plea. Noah took another step forward. "Noah!" Grace's voice came from the doorway, sharp with worry. "Stay back." But Noah shook his head. "He's not bad," he insisted. Then, softer, he whispered, "He's asking for help." Ethan and Grace exchanged glances. There was something about the way Noah said it, something almost unsettling in his certainty. "Ethan," Grace said hesitantly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "We can't just leave him out here." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "I know." With slow, careful movements, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over the dog's frail body. Then, just as cautiously, he slid his arms underneath it. The dog let out a faint whine but didn't resist. It was too weak to fight. Bringing Max home. Inside, the warmth of the house felt jarring after the icy wind outside. Ethan gently laid the dog on an old blanket near the fireplace. Grace knelt beside it, her hands hovering just above its fur. "He's burning up," she murmured, "and this wound, it looks infected." Noah crouched beside the dog, his small fingers resting gently on its head. "I'll get water," he announced, darting toward the kitchen. Ethan sat back on his heels, watching as Grace inspected the dog's injuries. "We'll call the vet first thing in the morning," he said. Grace nodded, though worry still tightened her expression. Noah returned with a bowl of water, setting it carefully beside the dog's head. The German shepherd barely moved, but after a moment, its nose twitched. Slowly, weakly, it lapped up a few mouthfuls. Noah beamed. "See? He wants to stay." Ethan chuckled softly, ruffling his son's hair. "We'll see, buddy. First, we need to make sure he makes it through the night." Noah turned back to the dog, his voice soft as he stroked its damp fur. "It's okay now," he whispered. "You're safe." The dog exhaled a slow, shuddering breath. Then, for the first time since they had found it, its tail gave the faintest wag. Noah grinned. "I think his name is Max," he declared. Grace blinked. "What?" Noah turned to her, expression serious. "That's his name. He told me." Ethan and Grace exchanged another glance, this one heavier. It wasn't the first time Noah had said something strange like this. He had always been an intuitive child, sometimes almost eerily so. Grace reached for his hand. "Noah, sweetheart, dogs don't talk." Noah looked at her with those impossibly knowing eyes. "Max does." For a long moment, the only sound was the storm outside. Then, just as a distant howl echoed through the wind, Noah whispered, "Someone's looking for him." The fire crackled softly in the dimly lit living room, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The storm outside had settled into a steady snowfall, but the wind still howled through the trees, rattling the windows like a restless spirit. Max lay curled on the thick blanket near the fireplace, his body rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. His coat was still damp, and now that the adrenaline had worn off, the true extent of his injuries was becoming clear. Ethan knelt beside the dog, running a careful hand over its ribs. His fingers traced the sharp ridges of bone beneath the fur. Too thin, too weak. This dog had been on its own for a long time. But what troubled Ethan more was the wound on Max's side. The gash was clean, precise, not the ragged tear of an animal attack, nor the scrape of a careless injury. It looked deliberate. Grace sat beside Ethan, watching as he examined Max. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. "That cut," she said hesitantly. "It looks like a knife wound." Ethan's voice was grim. They exchanged a glance. Neither of them wanted to say it aloud, but the implications were clear. Someone had hurt this dog. And if Max had been running, who had he been running from? From the couch, Noah's small voice broke the silence. "He had a name before." Ethan turned to his son, frowning. "What do you mean, buddy?" Noah's blue eyes were distant, thoughtful. "He told me." Grace shifted uncomfortably, exchanging another glance with Ethan. This wasn't the first time Noah had said something odd that night. Ethan hesitated, then reached for the old leather collar still fastened around Max's neck. It was worn and cracked with age, the metal buckle rusted. A small circular tag dangled from it, so scratched and faded that the letters were barely legible. He turned it toward the light, squinting. One word remained: Kane. The name sent a strange chill through the room. Ethan felt the weight of it, the way it seemed to belong to the dog in a way that Max never could. Grace leaned closer, brushing her fingers over the tag. "That's not a random name," she murmured. "Someone loved this dog enough to give him a name, enough to give him a collar." Ethan exhaled. "Then where's his owner?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Noah, still perched on the couch, seemed unbothered by the mystery. He simply nodded, as if he had already known what the tag would say. His name was Kane before, but now he's Max. The boy shrugged. "He told me." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. "Noah, sweetheart, dogs don't—" Noah looked up, his blue eyes clear, unwavering. "Not like that." Silence settled over the room again. Then Max shifted, a low whimper escaping his throat. He was still asleep, his body curled tightly, as if bracing against something unseen. His ears twitched, his legs kicked slightly, like he was running even in his dreams. And then Noah, barely above a whisper, said, "Someone's coming for him." Later that night, long after Noah had been tucked into bed and the house had fallen into an uneasy quiet, Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could hear the steady breathing of Ethan beside her, the occasional creak of the old house settling, but beyond that, the night felt too still. Her thoughts kept circling back to Max, to the wound, to the name on the collar, to Noah's words. She turned onto her side, facing Ethan's sleeping form. "What if someone really is looking for him?" she murmured into the darkness. Ethan didn't respond. She wasn't even sure he had heard her. She didn't sleep that night. Noah, however, did. And he dreamed. In the dream, he was standing in the middle of an open field, the grass golden beneath a sky painted in twilight hues. Kane, stood beside him, his amber eyes watchful. The dog's posture was strong, alert, as if waiting for something. Then a voice. "Keep him safe." Noah turned. A man stood a few feet away, his face partially hidden in the dying light. He was tall, with a weathered face and tired eyes that held the same sadness Noah had seen in Max. He wore an old jacket, the kind soldiers wore in old movies, and his boots were caked in dust. His hair was grey at the temples, and there was something about the way he stood, straight-backed, disciplined, but worn down by something unseen. Noah somehow knew his name, Robert. The man looked at him, his expression firm but not unkind. "They'll come for him." His voice was steady. "But you have to protect him." The air grew colder. Noah opened his mouth to ask who they were, but before he could speak, Robert was already turning away, walking toward the horizon. Kane, let out a soft whine, stepping forward as if to follow, but the man only shook his head. "Not yet, boy." Then the sky darkened, the wind howled, and Noah woke up. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. The room was dark except for the faint glow of his nightlight. His fingers clutched the edge of his blanket. Max was at the foot of his bed, curled up, his breathing slow and even. Noah exhaled, trying to shake the dream from his mind. It felt too real. Then, from somewhere outside in the distance, a low, distant howl. Noah's breath caught, and then, barely above a whisper, Kane, lifted his head. His ears pricked forward, his body tensed, as if he had heard it too. The night had settled over Brunswick, thick and heavy. The snowstorm from the night before had left a pristine white blanket over the neighborhood, but now, under the dim glow of the streetlights, it felt eerily untouched, too quiet. The world outside the Carter house seemed frozen, suspended in the icy grip of winter. Inside, the warmth of the home was a stark contrast. The fireplace crackled softly, its amber glow flickering against the wooden walls. Ethan Carter stacked the last of the dinner plates into the dishwasher while Grace wiped the kitchen counter. The familiar rhythm of their nightly routine had returned. Except tonight, there was an unspoken tension lingering in the air. Max lay near the fireplace, his head resting on his paws. Though his body had relaxed, his amber eyes remained alert, watching everything with quiet intensity. Every now and then, his ears twitched, as if he were listening for something beyond the walls of their home. Across the room, Noah sat on the carpet, absent-mindedly turning a small toy car between his fingers. He hadn't said much all evening, but there was a certain stiffness in his posture. Then, without warning, he stopped. The toy car slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft clatter on the hardwood floor. His small body went still, and then in a whisper he said, "There's someone outside." Grace looked up sharply, her cloth frozen mid-wipe. Ethan frowned and stepped closer to his son. "Noah," he said, keeping his voice calm. "What do you mean?" Noah's blue eyes were fixed on the living room window. His fingers clutched the edge of his pajama shirt, his breath slow and measured. "He's watching," Noah murmured. Ethan followed his son's gaze to the window. The curtains were drawn back, revealing nothing but darkness outside. Snowflakes drifted lazily under the porch light, but beyond that, nothing. Ethan exchanged a look with Grace, then grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "I'll check," he muttered, slipping on his jacket. Grace hesitated. "Ethan, be careful." "I will." As Ethan stepped onto the porch, the cold wrapped around him like a vice. He clicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. His boots crunched against the fresh snow as he scanned the yard. At first, everything seemed normal. The snow-covered driveway, the leafless trees lining their fence, the distant glow of their neighbors' porch lights. Then he saw them. Footprints. They were deep, fresh, leading from the tree line toward their house, stopping just beneath the living room window. A prickle of unease crawled up Ethan's spine. The footprints were too large to belong to Noah. These belonged to an adult, a man. His flashlight followed the trail back toward the fence at the edge of their yard. That's when he noticed something else. Near the base of the fence, partially hidden by a snowdrift, was a small, dark stain. Ethan's stomach tightened. He took a step closer, angling the flashlight down. Blood. And it wasn't Max's. Inside the house, Grace hovered near the door, watching Ethan through the window. She could see his posture tense, the flashlight pausing over something in the snow. Then he turned back toward the house, his expression grim. Grace quickly unlocked the door, stepping aside as Ethan entered, shaking the snow from his boots. "There was someone out there," he confirmed, voice low. "Footprints leading right up to the window." Grace swallowed. "Did you see anyone?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but I found blood near the fence, a small amount but fresh." Grace paled. Noah, still sitting on the floor, traced invisible patterns on the rug with his finger. His voice was barely above a whisper. "He got hurt when he ran away." Ethan stiffened. "What?" Noah looked up at him. "The man outside." Ethan and Grace exchanged a glance. "Noah," Grace said carefully, kneeling beside him. "How do you know that?" Noah's fingers tightened on the fabric of his pants. "I just know." From the fireplace, Max let out a low, guttural growl. His ears pricked forward and his amber eyes locked onto the front door. Ethan's grip tightened around the flashlight. Something wasn't right. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence. Grace double-checked all the locks. Ethan placed the flashlight beside the couch, within arm's reach. Noah, despite the tension in the air, seemed oddly unbothered. He played quietly with his toys, occasionally glancing at Max, as if waiting for the dog to tell him something. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the footprints, erasing the evidence that someone had been there. But they all knew the truth. Someone had been watching, and whoever it was, they weren't gone. The morning after the discovery of the footprints, the Carter household remained on edge. The night had been restless for both Ethan and Grace, and even Max seemed more alert than usual, his ears constantly pricked, his gaze flicking toward the windows, as if anticipating something or someone. Ethan had always been a rational man. He believed in explanations, in logic. But as he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old, scratched collar tag with the faded name Kane. He felt something he wasn't used to, uncertainty. Noah, as usual, had already accepted it. "Max was Kane before," he said matter-of-factly, as he spooned cereal into his mouth. "That's what he told me." Ethan sighed, exchanging a glance with Grace, who was busy pouring coffee. He chose his words carefully. "Buddy, I know you feel close to Max, but dogs don't tell people things." Noah shrugged, munching thoughtfully on his breakfast. "Not with words." Ethan ran a hand down his face, then exhaled. There was no point arguing. Instead, he reached for his phone. "If this dog had an owner, we need to find out who they were." For the next several hours, Ethan called every local animal shelter, veterinary clinic, and rescue center within a 50-mile radius, asking if anyone had records of a German shepherd named Kane. Each call ended the same way: nothing. Frustration crept in. How could a dog this well-trained, a dog who clearly belonged to someone, leave no trace? Finally, on his 9th call, to a small vet clinic just outside town, he got a lead. The voice on the other end, an older man with a weary but kind tone, hesitated when Ethan mentioned the name. "Did you say Kane?" Ethan sat up straighter. "Yes, a German shepherd about 7 years old. He showed up at our house during the storm, injured." There was a pause. Then the man sighed. Kane belonged to Robert Hayes. The name sent a chill through Ethan, though he wasn't sure why. He grabbed a pen. "Who is Robert Hayes?" Another pause. Then in a quieter voice the man said, "He's missing." The name Robert Hayes wasn't one that Ethan recognized, but apparently everyone else in town did. Robert had been a Vietnam War veteran, a man in his early 70s, quiet and reclusive but always polite. He lived alone in a modest cabin on the outskirts of Brunswick, near the dense woods that stretched for miles beyond town. His closest companion? Kane. According to Miss Linda Parsons, a retired nurse who had lived next door to Robert for over a decade, Kane never left his side. "If you saw Robert, you saw that dog," she told Ethan when he visited her later that afternoon. Miss Parsons was a woman in her mid-60s, with sharp hazel eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She had the air of someone who had spent most of her life taking care of people, whether they wanted her help or not. As she sipped tea from a floral mug, she studied Ethan with a mix of curiosity and concern. "So you're saying Kane showed up at your place? That's strange." Ethan nodded. "And he was injured?" At that, Miss Parsons stiffened. "What kind of injury?" "A knife wound," Ethan admitted. For a moment she didn't say anything. Then, setting her mug down with a soft clink, she leaned forward. 3 months ago, she said carefully, Robert disappeared. Ethan frowned. "Disappeared?" Miss Parsons nodded. "One day he was here, the next, gone. The police did a welfare check when no one had seen him for a while. The door to his cabin was unlocked, but there were no signs of a struggle, just an empty house." Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "And Kane?" Miss Parsons exhaled. "That's the thing. Kane was missing too. Something about that didn't sit right." "Before he vanished," Ethan asked, "did Robert say anything strange?" Miss Parsons hesitated, then nodded. "A few days before he disappeared, he told me something that didn't make sense at the time. He said, 'If something happens to me, Kane will know what to do.'" Ethan's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. Kane had come to them, but why? Later that evening, back at the house, Ethan relayed everything to Grace. She listened quietly, stirring a pot of soup on the stove, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she turned to him. "So let me get this straight. Kane's real owner was a man who went missing months ago, and now the dog shows up here injured. That's not a coincidence, Ethan." "I know." They stood in silence for a moment, only the soft bubbling of the soup filling the room. Then Grace added, "And you're sure the blood outside wasn't Kane's?" Ethan nodded grimly. "Which means someone else is involved in this." The weight of it settled between them. Whoever had hurt Kane, whoever had been watching their house, it wasn't over. Noah was already in bed when Ethan checked on him that night. The boy was curled up under his blankets, his breathing soft and even. At the foot of the bed, Cain, Max, lay stretched out, his ears flicking at the sound of Ethan's footsteps. Ethan sat on the edge of Noah's bed, watching his son's peaceful face. For all his strangeness, Noah wasn't afraid, not of the dog, not of the things he seemed to know without explanation. "Dad?" Ethan startled. "Yeah, buddy." Noah's blue eyes opened, and in the dim glow of the nightlight, they almost seemed too deep, too knowing. "Did you find out who Max used to belong to?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, his name was Robert." Noah nodded, as if he had already known. "He told me," the boy murmured. Then, after a pause, "Robert's not gone." Ethan's breath hitched. "What?" Noah didn't answer. His eyes drifted shut again, his breathing slowing as sleep claimed him. Ethan swallowed hard. Cain had found them for a reason, and somewhere out there Robert Hayes was still waiting to be found. The days following Ethan's discovery about Robert Hayes were unsettling. The more they learned, the more questions seemed to arise, questions without easy answers. Yet, amidst all the mystery, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Noah and Cain shared a connection that defied logic. Ethan had always been a practical man. He didn't believe in coincidences, nor did he believe in supernatural explanations. But there was no denying what was happening. Noah, his bright, thoughtful, entirely normal 6-year-old son, seemed to understand Cain in ways that no one else could. And it wasn't just in the way the boy spoke to the dog. It was the way Cain listened, as if he understood every word. That afternoon, the house was warm with the scent of roast chicken and herbs, the kind of comfort food Grace always made when things felt uncertain. Snow still blanketed the backyard, but the sky was clear, a pale blue stretching endlessly overhead. Noah sat cross-legged near the fireplace, absent-mindedly running his fingers through Cain's thick fur. The dog was curled up on the rug, his body stretched toward the warmth, his head resting on Noah's lap. Ethan and Grace were at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed voices. "You think someone hurt Robert?" Grace asked, worry creasing her brow. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "But if he's missing and his dog showed up wounded, someone knows what happened." Grace exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't like this, Ethan. First the footprints outside, then the blood near the fence, and now this?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring toward the living room. Noah was whispering softly to Cain, his tiny fingers still tangled in the dog's fur. It was unsettling how easily the two communicated. Then, out of nowhere, Noah spoke. "Robert buried something," he said simply. The room went silent. Grace froze, her grip tightening around her coffee mug. Ethan sat up straighter. "What did you say?" Noah didn't look away from Cain. His small fingers absently traced the scars on the dog's side as he repeated, "He buried something. In the woods." A deep, heavy silence filled the air. Then Grace's voice, soft, careful. "Noah, who told you that?" Noah finally turned toward them, his blue eyes calm, clear. "Cain." The weight of Noah's words lingered long after he had gone to bed that night. Ethan sat in the living room staring at the fire, his mind racing. Robert had disappeared. Cain had appeared, wounded, desperate, running from something, and now Noah was saying that Robert had buried something in the woods. Ethan should have dismissed it, should have told himself that Noah was just a kid with an overactive imagination, but something about the way the boy had spoken, so certain, so calm, made it impossible to ignore. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd call again. It rang twice before a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Detective Owen Carter." Owen Carter was a man who carried his exhaustion in the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, cautious. A seasoned detective in his early 40s, his dark brown hair was perpetually unkempt, and his stubble had long passed the acceptable phase of 5 o'clock shadow. He had the kind of face that had seen too many crime scenes, too many unsolved cases, too many things he couldn't fix. He also happened to be Ethan's older brother. Ethan had called him only once before with something serious years ago, when their father had passed unexpectedly. They weren't estranged exactly, but life had a way of creating distance. So when Ethan had called, Owen knew it wasn't a social call. Now, standing in the Carter family's kitchen, his sharp hazel eyes swept the room with quiet calculation. "Tell me everything," he said simply. Ethan recounted the last few days, the footprints, the blood, the strange circumstances of Robert Hayes' disappearance. Owen listened in silence, arms crossed over his broad chest. When Ethan finally finished, the detective didn't look skeptical. He looked interested. "Noah," Grace corrected softly. Owen nodded. "Noah? You think he knows something?" Ethan exhaled. "I don't know what to think, but he's never met Robert, never heard of him, so how the hell would he know he buried something?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. Then, rubbing the back of his neck, he muttered, "Damn it." "What?" Grace asked, brow furrowed. Owen sighed. "I pulled Robert's missing person report before coming over. The file wasn't big. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs of forced entry. But there was one detail that stuck with me." He looked at Ethan. "Before he disappeared, Robert withdrew $5,000 in cash from his bank." Ethan's stomach twisted. Grace frowned. "Why?" "No idea," Owen admitted. "But guess where the last place he used his credit card was?" A pause. Then Ethan whispered, "The gas station by the woods." Owen nodded. "If Noah's right, and Robert really did bury something, that might explain why someone was after Kane." Ethan exchanged a glance with Grace, unease settling deep in his bones. If Robert had been hiding something valuable, someone else wanted it, and they had come looking. That night Noah dreamed. He was standing in a clearing in the woods, the wind rustling through the trees. The snow-covered ground beneath his feet felt real, crisp and cold. Kane was beside him, ears alert, his amber eyes glowing in the moonlight. And just ahead, a man. Noah recognized him instantly, though he had never met him in real life. Robert Hayes. The older man looked tired, his lined face weary, but his eyes were sharp. He studied Noah for a long moment before speaking. "They don't know what they're looking for," Robert said, "but they know it's there." Noah swallowed. "What did you bury?" Robert didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Kane. "You found him," he murmured. "Good boy." Kane let out a soft whine, stepping closer. Robert turned back to Noah, his gaze serious. "Listen to him," he said. "He'll show you." Noah opened his mouth to ask more questions. "Where are you? What happened to you?" But the wind howled through the trees, drowning out his words. And then he woke up. Ethan was still awake when Noah appeared in the doorway. "Dad?" Ethan sat up straight. "Noah, what's wrong?" The boy hesitated, then stepped closer. "I know where it is." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. "Where what is?" Noah's small fingers curled into fists. "What Robert buried." Kane lifted his head from the rug, his amber eyes flicking to Noah. A deep, knowing silence filled the room. Then Ethan, voice barely above a whisper, asked, "Where?" Noah looked up, his blue eyes unwavering. "In the woods," he said, "behind Robert's house." The winter wind cut through the trees as the Carter family pulled up to Robert Hayes's abandoned house. The old cabin sat in eerie silence, surrounded by overgrown weeds now buried beneath thick layers of snow. The windows were dark, the front porch sagging under years of neglect. It had the look of a place that had been forgotten by time. Ethan stepped out first, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Detective Owen Carter followed close behind, his sharp eyes scanning the area as if expecting trouble. Grace and Noah stayed near the truck, hesitant, while Max, Kane, jumped out, landing with a soft thud onto the snowy ground. His ears twitched, his body stiff as he took in the surroundings. "Do you think anyone's been here recently?" Grace asked, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Owen exhaled, his fingers tapping against the grip of his holstered pistol. "Hard to say. No fresh footprints, but that doesn't mean we're alone." Ethan turned to Noah, crouching to meet his son's gaze. "Are you sure, buddy? You're certain this is the place?" Noah nodded without hesitation. His blue eyes were unwavering. "Max knows." Ethan glanced at the dog. Max stood at full attention, nose lifted to the air, eyes locked onto the backyard. Then, without warning, he bolted, his powerful legs cutting through the snow as he made his way toward the large oak tree that loomed behind the house. "Max!" Grace called, but Ethan held up a hand. "Let him go," he said. Something told him the dog had been waiting for this moment. By the time they reached the oak tree, Max was already digging. Snow and dirt flew in every direction as the German shepherd clawed at the frozen ground with desperation. His breathing was heavy, his body moving with a purpose none of them could ignore. Ethan grabbed a nearby branch, using it to break the hardened earth. Owen did the same, his experience with crime scenes giving him an unsettling certainty about what they were about to uncover. After several minutes of digging, metal scraped against metal. Ethan's heart pounded. He cleared away more dirt, revealing the rusted edges of an old metal box. Max let out a sharp bark, stepping back as if to say, "This is it." Owen crouched down, brushing more dirt away with his gloved hands. The box was locked, but time and moisture had corroded the latch enough that with a little force, Ethan was able to pry it open. Inside, there were stacks of old yellowed papers, a leather-bound journal, and several photographs tucked inside a plastic sleeve. Ethan's hands were shaking as he pulled out the journal. The cover was cracked, the edges worn from years of handling. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the familiar, slanted handwriting of Robert Hayes. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it." Ethan swallowed hard. Owen took out the photographs and held them up. They were aged, but the faces were clear. Men in military uniforms, some smiling, some standing in rigid formations. One particular photo showed Robert standing with a group of 6 other men, all wearing the same fatigues. Then Grace noticed something. The back of each photo had a name. One by one they read them aloud. Daniel Hensley, Joseph McCarthy, Vincent Calloway, Anthony Morris, Peter Stanton. All of them had been missing or dead within the last 5 years. Ethan felt the cold grip of realization tightening around his chest. "This isn't just a journal," he murmured. "It's a list." Noah, standing between his parents, looked at the journal's pages, then up at Max. He touched the dog's fur and whispered, "He was protecting this." Grace's voice trembled. "Ethan, what does this mean?" Owen took the journal and flipped through the pages, scanning Robert's notes. His expression darkened as he reached the later entries. "He knew something," Owen said grimly, "something that got these men killed." Then, a gunshot split the air. The sound was deafening, echoing through the silent forest. Snow erupted just feet from where they stood, a bullet tearing into the earth. "Down!" Owen shouted, grabbing Noah and pulling him behind the tree. Grace let out a cry, dropping to the ground as Ethan lunged to cover her. Max snarled, his body rigid with tension, his eyes locked on the direction of the shot. Owen was already reaching for his gun, scanning the tree line. "We're not alone," Ethan whispered. Then footsteps, heavy, fast-moving, approaching from the direction of the woods. Max let out a deep, menacing growl. Ethan's mind raced. Had they been followed, or had someone been watching Robert's house, waiting for them to show up? Owen motioned for Ethan to move. "Take Grace and Noah, get to the truck, now." "But go!" Owen barked. Before Ethan could argue, another shot rang out, this time splintering the bark of the oak tree inches from where Noah had been standing. Max snapped into action. With a powerful leap, he bolted toward the shooter, his paws kicking up snow as he moved with deadly precision. "No!" Grace gasped, but Max was already gone. Owen fired once, twice toward the source of the gunfire, but the attacker was quick, disappearing into the trees. A second later, the forest fell silent again. Max had vanished after them. Back at the truck, Ethan threw the box onto the back seat, his hands still shaking as he turned to Noah. "You okay, buddy?" Noah nodded, though his wide eyes told a different story. "Where's Max?" Ethan clenched his jaw, scanning the woods. "He's—" Before he could finish, a figure emerged. For a heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought it was the shooter, but then Max came bounding into view, stopping just at the edge of the trees. His fur was bristling, but he was unharmed. At his feet, a man lay motionless in the snow. Owen moved first, gun drawn, approaching cautiously. The man groaned, his hand clutching his leg where Max had clearly sunk his teeth in deep. His face was obscured by a black ski mask, but his clothes were dark, tactical, military. Owen pulled the mask off. The man, early 40s, gaunt face, scar over his right eye, glared up at them with barely concealed fury. His lip curled. "You shouldn't have dug that up," he hissed. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Owen knelt beside him. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer, but the way he smirked, even in pain, sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into," the man said darkly. Ethan exchanged a look with Owen. He was right. They had uncovered something much bigger than they realized, and now someone wanted them dead for it. The night air was heavy with tension, the only sounds the wind rustling through the trees and the labored breathing of the Carter family. Snow crunched beneath their feet as they moved cautiously, keeping their eyes on the man, lying motionless in the snow, the man Max had taken down. Owen had his gun trained on him, but there was something unsettling about the way the man stared back. He wasn't scared. He wasn't panicked. He was waiting. Then, from the shadows, another figure emerged. Ethan stiffened. Grace pulled Noah closer. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black winter coat that made him look even more imposing. His jet-black hair was slicked back, sharp cheekbones framed a face that was all hard edges, and his dark eyes flickered with something dangerous. "Put the gun down," he said, his voice even, calculated. Owen didn't move. The man stepped closer, his boots crunching over the frozen ground. Max bristled, lowering his stance, a deep growl reverberating from his chest. "I said put it down," the man repeated, but this time his gaze shifted, not to Owen, not to Ethan, but to the metal box in Grace's hands. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Who the hell are you?" The man smirked, a cruel, knowing look. "Victor Hayes," he said. The name sent a chill through Ethan. Robert's nephew. The man who had been fighting for his uncle's estate, the same man who, if Robert's notes were true, had a lot more to do with his disappearance than he let on. Owen tightened his grip on the gun. "You were looking for this, weren't you?" Victor tilted his head, his eyes flicking toward the fallen man in the snow. "I see my associate was a little impatient. I told him we could handle this without trouble, but—" He sighed, shaking his head. "Well, you know how some people are. Always rushing things." "You broke into Robert's house," Ethan accused. Victor didn't even flinch. "I was reclaiming what's mine." Noah, who had been silent until now, whispered, "Robert didn't want you to have it." Victor's eyes snapped to the boy, his expression unreadable. "You don't even know what's inside that box, kid." Noah straightened. "I know it's important." Victor let out a slow, measured breath. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." Owen's jaw tightened. "You're not getting the box." Victor smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was the kind that sent a cold, creeping fear down Ethan's spine. Because Victor wasn't worried. He had backup. And just as that thought hit Ethan, two more figures emerged from the shadows. Ethan barely had time to react before Max lunged. The German shepherd moved fast, too fast, launching himself at Victor with a snarl that sent snow flying in every direction. Victor dodged just in time, stumbling back, his coat whipping in the wind. "Damn dog!" he spat. Before Ethan could step forward, one of Victor's men rushed him. Ethan barely managed to block the incoming blow, his body twisting with the impact. The man was built like a boulder, thick arms, a shaved head, and a look of brute strength. Grace screamed. Owen fired a shot into the air. "Get back," he ordered. Victor didn't flinch. If anything, he looked amused. Ethan struggled against the man holding him, gritting his teeth as the weight of his attacker bore down on him. But then, a blur of fur and muscle slammed into the man's side. Max. The German shepherd clamped his jaws around the attacker's arm, his growl deep and vicious. The man roared in pain, swinging wildly, but Max held firm. "Noah, run!" Grace cried, shoving their son toward the trees. Victor's head snapped toward the movement. "Oh no, you don't—" Ethan threw himself forward, grappling Victor, tackling him into the snow. They rolled, struggling for control, fists flying. Victor was strong, but Ethan had something he didn't, a reason to fight. Noah ran as fast as his little legs would carry him. His breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, his boots slipping in the snow. He didn't know where he was going, he just knew he had to get away. Max would find him, he always did. But then a hand grabbed his arm. Noah screamed, twisting wildly, kicking with everything he had. The man grunted, struggling to hold on to him. "You're not going anywhere, kid." Noah bit his hand, hard. The man cursed, releasing him for just a second, but it was enough. A blur of black and tan shot out of nowhere. Max. Noah had never seen the dog move so fast. His muscles coiled with raw power, his teeth bared in a feral snarl. Max tackled the man, sending them both crashing into the snow. Noah scrambled away, heart pounding. Max turned, his body a shield between Noah and the attacker. The man, bleeding, held up his hands in surrender. "Call him off," he growled. Noah clenched his fists. "Max, stay." The German Shepherd didn't move, his eyes locked on the man, his body still low, dangerous. Then a car engine roared to life nearby. Noah turned just in time to see Victor sprinting toward a black SUV. His mother screamed, "Ethan!" His dad was still struggling against Victor's other men, Owen trying to fight off a second attacker. Victor threw open the car door. The box. The realization hit Noah all at once. Victor had the box. Ethan saw it too late. Victor jumped into the driver's seat, the engine roaring, tires spinning wildly in the snow. Owen fired another shot, but it was too late. The SUV peeled away, disappearing down the icy road. Ethan cursed. Max barked, taking off after it, his powerful legs tearing through the snow. "No!" Ethan shouted. "Max, stop!" But Max didn't stop. He ran, chasing the only thing left of Robert Hayes' secrets, his purpose. The Carter family watched as the taillights vanished into the dark. Noah clutched his chest, his breath shaking. "They took it," he whispered. Owen gritted his teeth. "And now they know we're in their way." Ethan exhaled, turning toward Max, who stood at the edge of the road, still staring after the SUV. His ears twitched. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Because Max wasn't just angry, he was waiting for the next move. The cold night air was thick with tension as the Carter family ran through the snow-covered forest, their breath coming out in sharp clouds. The only sound was the crunch of their boots against the icy ground and the distant roar of an engine, the same black SUV that had taken Robert's box. Max ran ahead, his paws barely making a sound as he navigated through the dense thicket. His body was low to the ground, muscles taut, ears pricked forward, leading them through paths only he seemed to know. Ethan's heart pounded as he cast a glance behind them. They were being chased. Somewhere in the darkness, figures moved between the trees, following their trail. He could hear them, the breaking of branches, the soft murmur of voices coordinating their attack. Noah clung to Grace's hand, his small legs struggling to keep up, but he never let go of Max with his eyes. The dog was their only guide now, and somehow Noah trusted him completely. Then Max suddenly stopped. His ears flicked, and then he growled. "Ethan!" Grace gasped, pointing ahead. A clearing opened before them, leading straight to a narrow road cutting through the forest. But standing right in the middle of it was Victor Hayes. He was breathing hard, his dark coat torn at the sleeve, a thin trickle of blood running from a scratch on his cheek. His once calm demeanor was now cracked with frustration, his black-gloved hands clenched into fists. Behind him, the black SUV had skidded to a stop, its headlights cutting harsh beams through the falling snow. Max lowered himself into a defensive stance. His body trembled from exhaustion, but his amber eyes blazed with unyielding determination. Victor shook his head. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat, his voice raw with anger. Ethan positioned himself in front of Grace and Noah. "You're the one who doesn't get it," he shot back. "This ends now." Victor scoffed. "You think you're heroes?" His eyes flicked towards Noah, and for a moment there was something almost curious in his gaze. "The kid, he knows things, doesn't he?" Ethan stiffened. I bet Robert talked to him, Victor murmured, almost to himself. Did he tell you where the rest of it is? Noah's small fingers clenched into Max's fur, but he said nothing. Victor sighed and reached inside his coat. A gun. Grace inhaled sharply, her grip tightening around Noah. Then Max moved. The German shepherd sprang forward, his muscles coiling like a tightly wound spring. Victor barely had time to pull out his weapon before Max was on him. The force of the impact sent both of them crashing to the ground, rolling through the snow. Max's jaws clamped onto Victor's wrist, causing the gun to fire wildly into the air. The SUV doors burst open. Victor's men spilled out. Owen fired his own gun, a warning shot that sent two of them ducking for cover. "Back off!" he barked. Sirens. The distant howl of police sirens cut through the air. Victor's eyes widened. His remaining men hesitated. Max still held on. Even as Victor struggled, even as pain shot through the old dog's battered body, he refused to let go. Victor roared, throwing a punch at Max's side. The impact was brutal. A sickening crack echoed through the night. Max yelped but didn't release him. Then another gunshot rang out. Victor cried out in pain. Owen had hit his leg, sending him collapsing into the snow. The SUV roared to life again. Victor's remaining men jumped inside, tires screeching as they peeled away, leaving him behind. The police arrived moments later. Red and blue lights washed over the frozen road, cutting through the darkness. Victor was dragged to his feet, blood staining his pant leg. Even in handcuffs, he smirked at Ethan. "This isn't over," he muttered. Owen tightened his grip on Victor's arm. "Yeah, it is." But Ethan wasn't looking at Victor. He was looking at Max. The German shepherd stood shakily on all fours. His breath came in short, rapid bursts, and his side heaved with pain. Then, suddenly, his legs buckled. "No!" Noah screamed, running toward him. Grace dropped to her knees beside the dog, cradling his head in her hands. Max's once bright amber eyes fluttered, struggling to stay open. Noah sobbed, pressing his face into Max's fur. "You did it, buddy," he whispered. "You protected us." Max's tail thumped once. Then, very gently, he licked Noah's hand. His body relaxed, and his eyes closed. 2 months later. The snow had melted. The days were longer now, filled with warmth, but the house still felt emptier. Max's absence was everywhere. Noah had stopped talking to invisible people. He didn't whisper in the quiet moments anymore. His nights weren't filled with strange dreams, but his smile wasn't the same. One morning, Grace knelt beside him in the living room. "Sweetie," she said gently, "do you think it's time we go to the shelter?" Noah hesitated. Then finally he nodded. The animal shelter was busy. Rows of kennels stretched along the walls, filled with dogs of all sizes. Some barked excitedly, some wagged their tails, but Noah didn't stop at any of them. He kept walking. Then, at the very end of the row, he saw him. A small German shepherd puppy, barely 3 months old. His ears were still too big for his head, one flopping slightly. But his eyes were familiar. Noah knelt. The puppy didn't move at first, then slowly he took a step forward, another. Then, finally, he pressed his tiny body against Noah's chest. Noah closed his arms around him. "His name is Hero," he whispered. The shelter worker smiled. "Actually, we've been calling him Max Jr." Noah shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Max is still here. He's just helping Hero now." Spring had arrived, melting away the last remnants of snow that once covered the Carter family's backyard. The oak tree, where Max now rested, swayed gently in the warm breeze. The sun cast golden light over the house, filling it with warmth that had been missing for months. Noah sat on the porch, his legs swinging over the edge. In his arms, a small German shepherd puppy nestled comfortably, its tiny body rising and falling with soft, sleepy breaths. Grace stepped outside, watching her son as he stroked the pup's fur. "Hero seems happy here," she said, kneeling beside him. Noah nodded. "He is." He looked up at her, eyes bright. "And Max is happy too." Grace smiled, brushing a hand through Noah's hair. "Do you still dream about him?" Noah thought for a moment, then nodded. Not as much as before. But last night, I think he was saying goodbye. Grace's chest tightened, but before she could respond, Hero stirred in Noah's lap, letting out a tiny bark, not loud, but strong, confident. Noah grinned. See, Max is still teaching him. A gust of wind rustled the oak tree, and for a brief moment, Grace could have sworn she heard something. A soft bark carried through the air, fading into the distance. She exhaled, squeezing Noah's hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's go inside." Noah stood, Hero trotting beside him, his tiny paws padding over the wooden steps. As they reached the door, the pup paused, looking back toward the oak tree for just a second. Then, with a happy wag of his tail, he followed his family inside.